Thanks very much, Andy. So I'm here from the Centre for Excellence in Learning and Teaching, whereas Caroline is a Senior Technical Specialist. And the reason that we're both speaking is because in a project like this, it involves lots of different people, and you can have the technical side, and you also need the teaching and learning side. And then the third thing, which I think was probably the biggest lesson we learned from the project, is you need the people side too. So just very briefly, let me tell you a little bit about our university. We're located in the west of Ireland. We've got about 17,000 full-time equivalents, 2,500 staff. We've been through various reorganisations. We now have 60 disciplines which are organised into 16 schools within 5 colleges. We provide courses, teaching and learning across a range of disciplines, including medicine, engineering, humanities, drama, business, law. So we've got pretty much everything here. Since 2007, Blackboard has been our primary institutional VLE, and at that time we took the step of integrating it with our student record system, which, for the record, is Quercus. And that has meant that since 2007, all of our courses are automatically created on Blackboard, and students are automatically enrolled in the correct courses on Blackboard, which at the time was a huge thing, because it meant that once staff got access to their courses, they just had to go in and their students were there. And that really helped to drive adoption back then in 2007. And since then, certainly from our point of view, the Centre for Excellence in Learning and Teaching, when it comes to Blackboard, we've been very much trying to encourage. We like to be the carrot rather than the stick. We try to encourage members of staff, academic staff, to make better use of Blackboard than they are currently doing. So we've got a whole range of behaviours on there. Since 2011, we've been managed hosting, which is probably relevant as well. So up until really quite recently, all of the data integration has been one way, going into Blackboard. And this project really marks the first time that we've been looking at getting information back out of Blackboard again. And it all comes about because of a really major institutional project or umbrella of projects, which is called Academic Simplification, which I have to say is a bad word around the university at the moment. But that kicked off in about 2011. And it involved a lot of projects looking at different aspects of academic administration. And one part of that, for example, a number of years ago, was looking at curriculum management, and a new system was brought in, which is a module manager for all of our courses. But another component of that has been the online results entry. And that, just to be clear what we're talking about, it is whereby final marks for each module are returned via Blackboard to the student record system. So that's essentially what online results entry is. And I will mention as well, because this might be different from the situation in other institutions, and that is that our exams office are looking for a single mark between 0 and 100 for each student per module code. And that's all that they want, that's all that they are interested in. So I will ask Caroline to come in and explain a little bit about what the system used to be like.
So, as Sharon explained, the online results is looking at a brand new system for getting the marks back to the exams office. But what did we do historically? Well, historically we had a homegrown solution. It has existed for about 15 plus years. It was based on Microsoft Excel, SQL, VB Script, and a little bit of black magic by one person in the university. It catered for about 10,000 Excel spreadsheets per year, 130,000 marks. The system itself worked very well, but when they reviewed the process as part of the academic simplification, concern was raised around some of the data quality. So to give you an example, the process is this, and don't worry, we're not going to dig deep into this. The bottom two rows really were the student information system, the exams office, and the processes they performed. But what we were interested in is what actually happened when the Excel sheets went out to the academics and they started to collate the marks. There was an awful lot of gathering marks from different systems, even down to paper-based. And at this point, some marks would possibly be forgotten, or data might have been slightly inaccurate. And this would generate a huge amount of manual work for the exams office after marks had been returned, where they would have to edit and adjust and correct mistakes. So the online results project was born, and as project manager, I was given the task of 4 objectives. The 2 on the left were not simple, but was straightforward enough. We wanted to convince and encourage people to use functionality that already existed in Blackboard. Sporadically, provisional results were being provided to some students for 2 years before this project came along, but it wasn't guaranteed. Also feedback, it came down to whether or not the academic, the student, the particular module, whether or not and how much online feedback would be provided. The 2 on the right for objectives were a little bit more complex and more technical focused. We needed to improve the data quality to minimize the amount of changes that would happen after the marks have been returned. We want to reduce the manual processing, make things a little bit more streamlined. To do this, we pulled together a team of, well, basically everybody. We needed exams because they were driving the need for this project. We needed our vendors because each of our enterprise systems we would either be taking data from or putting data into. ISS, my department, would be involved from a technical perspective, and certainly Sharon's team would need to be involved from the teaching aspect of the project and from the use of Blackboard and its functionality. We had help desk academic representatives, and I would still say today we possibly needed more people. This is the solution that we decided we would try to build. It was 3 enterprise systems on the left-hand side, a layer in between that would manage the transportation of the data, and ultimately, not relevant for this particular project, but future planning is the data store, which will be a warehouse. So, how did we actually come to this design and decide who needs to be on the teams? We needed requirements. We spent our time doing demos, workshops, technical interviews with the one person who fully understood how this whole process worked. We discussed it with our stakeholders, made sure that they were happy that what we had defined as the requirements and also the proposed solution met what they expected. And we were given a hard deadline, a deadline date by May 25th, 2016. All undergraduate marks would be returned by Blackboard to our student information system, and there would be no other means for the marks to be returned. This is the first time they had set a hard deadline and would be enforcing it. So back over to you, Sharon.
Thanks, Caroline. So this is an extract from our module manager system, which is called Acari. And it just describes for one module the assessment that is going on there. And I'm going to try and use the pointer tool here to kind of point a few things out, so hopefully that will work. So this is one module, and you can see that for the written assessment here, these are essentially the exam papers. So there are 2 exam papers, paper 1 and paper 2, which are both written papers. They both take place one takes place in semester 1 and the other in semester 2. They're both first sitting exams. They're both 2-hour exams, and they are worth 30% of the marks. So taken together, they make up 60% overall. If I just skip down here, then the other 40% is made up of 2 pieces of continuous assessment. And again, they're both first sitting. They take place, the continuous assessment 1 is semester 1, continuous assessment 2 is in semester 2. Now we have got within our university a system whereby if students don't make the required standard in the first sitting, they have an opportunity then in the autumn to take a second sitting, which is what is going up here under paper 1 and paper 2, second sitting in the autumn. And in the autumn, there's no continuous assessment, and all of the the marks are made up from the 2 written papers. So it was this sort of information in our module manager that we wanted to try and replicate within Blackboard. So what we thought would happen, or what we hoped would happen according to our requirements, was that we would end up with a grade center which would look something like this. So hopefully you'll recognize some aspects of this screen, but I'm going to go through the requirements that we came up with and explain each of those as we go along. So the first requirement was that assessment columns could be brought into Blackboard. So this relates to a question that was asked there in the chat box about the assessment columns coming into Blackboard, which could then be populated and sent back out to the exam system. That is possible, and it's certainly possible technically to achieve. In the end, we decided not to do this, and that was for 2 reasons. The first reason was that the exams office weren't interested in the continuous assessment marks, and they weren't interested in the components really of each piece of assessment. And so the only reason they'd be going in really is as a convenience to the markers, to the academics. But the other reason that we didn't do it is because I mentioned before that we had a new module manager system, which is Academic, and to be quite honest, the data that is contained in Academic is not the best data. Academic was kind of landed on the academic and academic admin people a couple of years ago. It's still not settled, it's still not right, and people were told that they had to create their curriculum within Academic, but what has happened in a lot of cases is just the very basics have gone in. It's kind of been a bit of a dump, and nobody was expecting that the data that went in would suddenly be exposed within Blackboard. So we decided quite early on that we weren't going to be too worried about moving the assessment columns into Blackboard. The second thing that we needed was the return columns, and these are the 2 columns over on the far right, and so they are named here provisional and final mark. The provisional column, Caroline mentioned it earlier, that academics had been used to providing provisional results, and this is really only for semester 1 modules. They were used to returning provisional results or giving an indication of results to students in January for semester 1 modules. So as part of this project, we decided that we would create a column that staff then could use as a convenience to return provisional results to students. So the idea is that they populate this column and they then make it visible. So they remove that little red line so that students can actually see the marks. Exams office have no interest in the provisional column whatsoever, so we don't have any intention of taking anything from the provisional column back out to Quirkus. The final mark column, on the other hand, is what is replacing what was known here as the white sheets. So that replaces the Excel spreadsheet that staff would normally have filled in. So the idea now is that staff fill in that final mark column, and then there is an extract function within the Grade Center, which is part of the Grades Journey tool, and that then sends the marks back off on the start of its journey back to our student record system. The next thing that we wanted, I thought I had these color-coded in terms of what was achieved and what wasn't achieved, but anyway, the requirement number 3 and 4 were to do with this column here, which is called course instance. So in NUIG, and I'm sure this is similar in many other institutions, a student registers for a course, a program of study, and within that program of study then they are registered for a number of modules underneath that. Now, the marks are returned at a module level, but they are returned according to a course instance. So in this case here, you can see that there are 2 different course instances. One is a BS, which is Business Studies course, and one is EH, which is actually for overseas students. So in the past, staff would have received a separate Excel sheet for each course instance. So if they were teaching a single module, say a maths module, for example, and that module was being taught to science students and engineering students and to math students and art students, each of those student groups would have had a different course instance and marks would have been returned per course instance. So it was absolutely vital for us that the course instance became visible in the grade centre. And that was something that doesn't come out of the box with the Grade Journey tool. This is a piece that had to be developed for us. First of all, it had to be a text column. So it's not a calculated column, and anything that comes out of the box, as far as I'm aware, with the Grade Journey tool is normally a calculated column. But this had to be a text column, and moreover, it had to bring data in. So it's the only piece related to the Grades Journey tool where we're bringing more data into Blackboard. But that absolutely had to be part of the project, and that has been achieved. The next thing that we wanted to do was to remove the default columns. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but that total column has been the bane of my life for the last 6 or 7 years, because it has this horrible habit of just adding up everything else that goes into the grade centre without staff sort of being aware of it. And unless it's pointed out to them, they end up with a figure in that total column which is visible to students, which can bear no relation to their actual marks at all. So we wanted to make sure that we could remove that total and weighted total column, because what will happen, and what did happen in fact, is that staff, say in January, were filling out their provisional column, and then they might fill out the same figure for the final mark column, and suddenly in the total column, without them doing anything else, they're getting double that mark in the total column, and that is what is visible to students. So that obviously is a bit of a disaster when it comes to returning marks. So we wanted to make sure that we could remove those default columns. That is possible as part of the Grade Journey. However, we weren't able to implement it for this year, and the reason for that is that all of this went into our grade centre in November, if I'm correct, where the semester, the academic year, had already been in swing for some time, and we had no idea what use people were making of the total and weighted total columns at all. So this year we just had to live with it, but for next year the total and weighted total columns are gone, which is fantastic. The next thing we wanted, I see I do have some colour coding at least, is the lock on return. We had hoped that once marks were extracted from the grade centre, that those would then be locked, so that you couldn't have somebody coming along and changing marks and expecting that the changed marks would magically appear back in the student record system. However, that's not possible. The other thing just to mention here, which when we first gave this presentation, it was before the May deadline, and we've had a lot of experience since then, but we also had some issues around people changing the title of the final mark column. So for whatever reason, they thought it might be a good idea to go in and change the title of that column, which you can do, obviously. However, what that means is that it really messes up the return, and the mark does not get successfully returned back to the student record system in that way. So we did have a few issues with that, and particularly with our Irish language staff, who decided it would be a great idea to rewrite or to change the name of that to an Irish name. So that's not possible to do. The next thing which we had hoped we'd be able to do, but again wasn't possible, we arranged so that these two columns, the provisional and final mark column, those are both text columns. They're not calculated columns. We might change some of that for next year, but the reason for that was that we wanted to be able to, first of all, check any data that goes into these columns, and also try to restrict it to valid data. Now, our valid data is a little bit complicated, because you'll see I have this INC in here twice. And that is a special code that our exams office use for students who have not completed all the assessment requirements for the module. Rather than returning a 0 or returning a partial mark, the requirement from the exams office was that we had to allow INC, the code INC, to be returned. That means that that final mark column has to be a text column, because you can't overwrite anything that goes into a calculated column. And it also means that we cannot restrict the valid data. So in fact, staff have the ability to type whatever the heck they want into that column. So that takes a lot of communication. We have to make sure that they don't type in things like ABS, which some people think means absent, but exams office refuses to recognize it, or DEF, which in some people's minds means deferral. But a deferral can't be granted at the module level. It can only be granted by deans at a completely different level. So we're not dealing with deferrals here at all. But in fact, the way it is that staff can type anything that they want into that column. It's not limited to a number between 0 and 100. It could be a number outside of those limits. It's also not limited to any particular codes. So that was a bit of a problem for us, and the way we've had to deal with it is through communication and giving very clear guidelines. The next thing that we wanted to do, which isn't a huge thing, but it's this external grade, which is the grade that gets pulled out for the module and is seen by students perhaps through the mobile app, or through there's a widget that can be added onto the home page, and that is the column that gets pulled out. Now, a lot of staff don't really understand about that external grade, and they don't realize that maybe they should switch the external grade from the total column to somewhere else. So next year, what will happen is when we remove the total and weighted total columns, the external grade will be reset to point to the provisional column, which makes a lot more sense. We also were hoping that we could fix the position of the new columns when they come in. So we would like, for example, the course instance column to be locked to the left-hand side of the grade center, close to where the name or the ID of the student appears. Equally, we would like very much to be able to lock the provisional and final mark column over to the left, close to where the locked information is, but that's actually not possible. Back in November, when the new columns, and the new columns were the course instance column, the provisional and the final mark column, those went in November, as I said, and already people had been doing a lot of continuous assessment. So the provisional mark and final mark ended up to the right, because that's where new columns always appear. And so for staff, it meant a lot of scrolling backwards and forwards, and it wasn't always clear to them why those marks columns were appearing where they were appearing. When we create the new courses for the next academic year, they will appear, because they are new columns going in at the very beginning, they will appear beside the other student information columns, but they won't be locked there. Ideally, we'd like to lock them, but it's not possible. The next thing that we would like to do very much is to ensure that that final mark column, which is really only being used as a conduit back to the student record system, to make sure that that column is never made visible to students. As it is, the staff can always go in and change the visibility, can always make that column visible to students, which it shouldn't be. Blackboard is not the system of record for examination results, and that will only ever be the student record system. And so we would like to be able to lock the visibility, but it's not something that we can do. And finally, the last requirement was that we were hoping that we could restrict who can extract, who can perform the extract from the grade center. Anybody who is an instructor can extract from the grade center. And that is problematic for some of our courses where we might have quite large teams teaching a single module. So I'm thinking in particular, we have some medical modules where there might be up to 30 people who are all instructors on a single module, on a single course on Blackboard, and any of those 30 people can perform the extract, which isn't ideal. At the moment, we can't do anything about that, but in the future, it would be nice to do something on that. Okay, so that's me. I'll hand back over to Caroline.
Okay, so Sharon has taken you through what we wanted within the Grade Centre of Blackboard. But what I'm going to show you now is what we actually built at the end of the day. So very briefly, you will see the yellow arrows kind of all going towards Blackboard, and this is where we took data from 2 different systems to create our users, our memberships, our courses, and the grade columns that Sharon has referred to. The Grade Journey tool was installed and implemented, and that allowed us then to extract those grades columns that had been created back from Blackboard through our integration layer and into our student information system. So to give you an idea of timelines, if you were to commence doing one of these projects, the project started in 2013, and between 2013 and early 2015, we spent a lot of time on requirements, we spent a lot of time on designing the solution and discussing the integrations for each of the systems. Each system has a different way of giving you the data or accepting it. In May, we commenced the build, and between May and August, our primary focus was the removal of Snapshot and the introduction of the SIS framework to create all our users, our courses, our memberships. Along with this, we did a lot of testing on the grade journey and fed information back to Blackboard, such as the need for the course instance column, the text columns, and the ability to populate them. We went live in August with the integration layer and with the SIS framework. In September, we spent a little bit of time suffering through data inconsistencies. Although technology worked, data is data. You will always get some bad. October, we were happy. We had our updated Grade Journey tool. It now had the ability to hide the 2 columns. It had the ability to create the text columns for us and to allow us to populate it, and we started testing. Now, you remember earlier on I said we had a hard deadline of May 25th, 2016, and we were quite content in October that we still had 5-6 months ahead of us and everything was going to plan, or so we thought. So, as tends to happen in most projects, you meet a moment where requirements change. Early November, a member of the team had a thought that there was a potential that some marks needed to be returned to the student information system in January. This brought our deadline date forward about 5 months. After we got over the initial shock and panic, we rescheduled and we rebranded the January marks return as a pilot. We spent November and December finishing our testing, building the integration to allow that flow of data from Blackboard back to our student information system. And as Sharon mentioned, our columns went live. So the provisional, the final mark, and the course instant columns all went live in December and appeared in the courses. This, of course, brought questions. So January was spent with Sharon's team doing an immense amount of training to bring people up to speed as to why these columns had appeared and who needed to use them by the end of January. End of January, we had the provisional results were released. We'd hit our objective for the project by getting those out, and the pilot was a success. The international student marks were returned successfully to our student information system using the Grade Journey tool. Over to you, Sharon, for the training.
Thanks, Caroline. I think it's kind of important to realise that with all of the work that was going on in the background and with all the testing that was going on, basically the project team was probably about 2 weeks ahead of the academic staff at any particular time. And so it was very difficult to put training in, to plan training in advance, or even to make resources available, because, to be honest, we didn't know exactly how things would work. And a case in point is that we had started training in December on the assumption that, as far as we knew, we would be able to just grab the marks out of Blackboard. So as long as people had the marks in the final mark column, that there would be some sort of admin level functionality that would just be able to pull everything out. And then suddenly we realized, actually no, an instructor on each module has to go in and perform a course extract, which is 3 clicks or something like that. But we had already trained some groups at that stage and told them, yeah, just get the marks in, that's all you need to do. And then suddenly we had to change. So that provided certain difficulties, because we were doing what we could to the best of our knowledge, but at the same time we were often only a week or 2 ahead of where the staff were themselves. Anyway, given that, my team, which is actually quite a small team, we decided that we would offer workshops to staff throughout the month of January. And what we tried to do was to provide workshops maybe on a discipline basis or a program basis, so that we'd have staff who were doing similar things together in the room at the same time. And the reason for that is that we very quickly realized that the actual practice of getting together marks that exists in schools and disciplines and within programs varies significantly right across the university. We had no idea of the amount of diversity that there was at that level, which was always pre the white sheets before this. In total, we ran 24 discipline-specific workshops throughout the month of January, and we trained about 183 people in that first month. And remember that those were only the people who had to return marks at that stage for visiting students. But it was a lot of people. It was a lot of people to get trained. It was a lot of work for our team, and at the same time we were trying to build and develop resources, videos, and checklists, things that people could use. And at the same time we have a help desk ticketing system, so my team was also available certainly during working hours on that ticketing system, responding to people's queries. And I don't have the numbers for the tickets that came up, but we dealt with about 250 tickets in the month of January alone. I think that's probably enough on the training, Caroline.
Fair enough. So following our pilot, we sat back and we took stock of how did the process all work at the end of January, both from a technical and from a business sense. We needed to know technically was the way we could improve it and adjust it so that when we'd have a far higher load of marks coming back, it would work efficiently. From a business or from an academic point of view, we want to know people's experiences and was there any way that we could improve it. From that, we generated a single document to give a timeline to kind of allow people to have an insight into what they'd actually have to do and when it would be expected of them. What's in front of you at the moment is that timeline. The top 3 points were areas where we felt we needed to recommend or advise our academics of steps that they needed to make sure they had checked before they actually submitted their marks. And the rest was just to let them see what would happen on the deadline date. So May 25th came round, and thankfully I can report we had success. Although the team will possibly need to have recovery for the next year, we managed to get, as has been quoted, the first time in living memory, 99% of marks were returned to the exams office by the date. This had never happened before, and from the exams office, who were the main sponsors of the project, it was considered a huge success and a lot of happiness. We can talk about the pain at a later stage. Back over to you, Sharon.
Yeah, and this is just an example of the type of documentation that we developed. We were trying to make it as simple as possible, but to be honest, it's not very simple when you're having to tell people you need to go into the grade center, you need to make sure that you have hidden the total column from students, you need to make sure that the final mark column is never visible to students. You can enter your marks. If you want to upload from Excel, then you need to go and do this type of thing. If you have already calculated your grades within the grade center and it's not in the right column, then you now have to export from the grade center out into Excel and then re-import back into the grade center. So there was a lot of kind of messing around, which as I kind of hinted at earlier, that there's a lot of variety in actual practice that takes place around the university. So we were trying to let people know the best approach, give people advice, and trying to hold back some of the mavericks who were changing column names, or in some cases even deleting the final mark column and then creating their own. Why they thought that might work, I'm not really sure. But this is just an example of one of the one-pagers that we were able to produce. As well as that, I think that my lovely voice is recognized by many people across campus, because I recorded a lot of screen recordings demonstrating the process, and I've been complimented since then by many people saying that they used to hear my voice in their brains late at night because they've been going through the videos so often. So there was a lot of work involved in that, and it will have to change again for next year because there will be changes again, but at least we know where we're at the moment. So what would we do differently now that we can kind of take a little step back and look back over the last 2 years? It's interesting because we're at this stage, we're at the point where we're now having to think about the creation of courses for next year, while at the same time we're also thinking about how we're managing the second sitting marks, which you remember I pointed out before. So we've still got a lot of work to do. I know that Caroline has a few words to say about complexity, so I might just bring you in there, Caroline.
Yeah, I suppose lots of people kind of say, if you were to do this again, what would you do differently? And for me, from managing it, and particularly from a technical perspective, it was a hugely complex project. And if somebody was sitting down and starting it again, I would recommend maybe dividing it. Certainly you need to complete all the steps, but the step of us removing snapshot, going to the SAS framework, and introducing the grade journey tool all into one block, I think was overly complex and greater risk to the project. So if we were repeating it, I would suggest pick one, do that first, let it bed in for maybe a year, and then do the other. Maybe not do both at the exact same time. Yeah, I think we made it overly complex and a little bit more difficult for ourselves by doing it all in one bulk.
I might come in on the communications. So I personally, I think that the communications was poorly handled, and the project team wasn't really in a place where it could communicate effectively with academic staff and with college and school admin, because it was a sub-project of the Academic Simplification, and the communications should really have been coming from that level, but they weren't. So staff weren't really prepared for what was coming. And in the end, certainly when coming up to the creation of the new columns in November and December, a lot of the communication came to me, came to Celt by default, because nobody else was doing the communications, and we recognized that if we wanted to get people trained, Blackboard is essentially our system. We're synonymous with Blackboard on campus, that we had to step in and do the communications. And so we were communicating using a blog, a public blog, which I can give you the URL for. We were sending emails. To be honest, we have a problem with communication across campus, and this really didn't help. We were sending emails at school and college level, hoping that it would filter down to the lower levels, but obviously that doesn't always happen. So basically we were trying to do everything that we could to make sure that people felt safe and secure and supported, but that may not always have been the case. And in particular, a lot of staff, when we were meeting them in the workshops or when we were answering their tickets on the help desk, or as happened when they were phoning us and doing a kind of a round robin, let's see who we can get hold of, they just didn't understand why this was all happening. They saw it as just change for change's sake, and this brings us on to the change fatigue. They'd already gone through the whole module manager, that was a complete hassle. It hadn't been bedded down. They just felt that people were changing things. Academic administration was changing things for no good reason. Whereas we knew the reasons behind it, we knew that it had to be done, we knew that it was necessary, but that background, that reasoning wasn't communicated well. And then when it came to the actual communications, it was difficult that we weren't able to supply a one-page, this is how you do it. And the reason for that was that everybody was starting from a different place. So we had to take account of, okay, what are you doing currently? Okay, now let's see how you can adjust what you're doing currently to fit the new system. It wasn't just, you know, this is how you do it, end of story. So communications were a challenge, and I think the whole change fatigue, that went against us, and we did have some issues around that. So to be honest, with the success back in May, it's almost a miracle that it was so successful, and I think nobody is more surprised than ourselves, to be honest. But we did it, which is great, and it can only get easier from here. Do you want to add anything, Caroline?
Well, personally speaking, yes, we could do with it being a little bit easier going forward, but yeah, I agree with you, Sharon. Certainly on the communications, it was difficult. As you said, within the team, it wasn't really our responsibility to get the information out there, but thankfully your team kind of bridged that gap for us, even though it wasn't really something that you should have had to do. I suppose from my perspective, as Ashley has mentioned in the chat there, it is really down to your business processes. It is down to what you need. I do feel that the Great Journey tool could work for some universities straight out of the box. Like us, it could need a little bit of tweaking and adjustment to kind of fit the processes. And I suppose from our perspective, what it highlighted is that we've quite a few business processes that need to be reviewed and might not always be a technical solution that will provide that solution for them. It sometimes needs to just be the business themselves changing habits. That's me done. Over to yourselves.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sharon and Caroline. That was great. A really good insight into NUI Galway, and I think a really pertinent point at the end there that you've made and Ashley's made is that you know, every instance is unique and different, and understanding that will really help make you have a successful project.